This is Let's Talk Iowa, a podcast about the gap between Iowa's policies and the families living through them. Thank you for tuning in. Here in Iowa, families like mine are fighting through a broken mental health system. Let's talk about it. All right, welcome back to Let's Talk Iowa. You know, every now and then I find myself scanning the horizon, hoping for a glimpse. Just now, I glanced out my window, and for a fleeting second, I thought, holy smokes, is that it? Is that him? I wish you all could see what I thought I saw. It appeared almost like, but then I realized it was just my dog in the backyard and not the mythical Bigfoot I've been searching for. And honestly, sometimes that's exactly what it feels like when you're trying to find real, tangible support within Iowa's social services system. You get tantalizing glimpses. You hear some distant whispers, but a clear, verifiable sighting of actual accessible help often, far too often, remains just out of reach. In our past episodes, we've spent a lot of time talking with legislators about a broken system. We've heard about the legal promises of the CA versus Garcia settlement and the immense budgetary challenges that leave families in crisis. But all of those conversations are about what happens after a family is already struggling. It's a reactive fix-it model where the state steps in with costly, often overly traumatic interventions like foster care, only after things have completely fallen apart. The debate in Des Moines over this fix-it model often falls along familiar party lines, and honestly, both sides have valid points from their own perspectives. From the Republican majority, we often hear an emphasis on fiscal conservatism and personal responsibility. There's genuine concern that taxpayer dollars should be used efficiently, avoiding wasteful spending and promoting self-reliance, and they contend that a strong economy, fueled by lower taxes and less government intervention, is the best social program, ultimately providing families with the resources to solve their own problems. And there's certainly merit to this idea, and we want effective, not just expensive solutions. And from the Democratic minority, the counter-argument is rooted in social investment and addressing root causes. And they correctly point out that spending money on prevention now through things like community-based mental health and family support services is not only more compassionate, but is actually the most fiscally responsible path, saving the state from the much higher cost of foster care and incarceration later on. As Senator Zimmer highlighted, their focus on the human cost of neglect is undeniable. But what if beneath these important and often deadlocked arguments, there's a third way? What if instead of continually arguing about how to pay for a crisis, what if we could find common ground by focusing on preventing it from happening at all? My guest today, Ryan Adams, has spent his career on the inside of that system as a residential counselor and a foster parent. He saw firsthand how the current fix-it model often fails the very children it's meant to protect. And now he's building a new approach from the ground up, a statewide network of family resource centers designed to give parents the support and community they need to thrive long before a crisis ever begins. This is the conversation about moving beyond the political stalemate to find a solution that works for Iowa's families, appealing to both fiscal prudence and genuine human care. Well, Mr. Adams, thank you for coming on today. And to start us off, could you just tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you into this work?
Strictly speaking, it all starts in Norway. In 2010, Norwegian woman and I, we were living in Lillehammer, Norway, and we moved to San Francisco together almost on a whim. But it was a great decision, but it was risky. This was when the housing bubble, the economy was still very rough, we'll say. And so we were living in the most expensive city in the country. The economy was risky. The only job I could find was as a residential counselor in a locked psychiatric facility for the most behaviorally challenging teenagers around. I didn't, to be honest, I didn't even want the job, but it's what was on offer, and I took it, and from there I just fell in love with it. So that's step one.
It's interesting because I met my wife, who's she's Canadian, but I met her when I was teaching overseas in China, and so when you were talking about that situation, it kind of just hit home. I was like, I've kind of experienced something like that, but instead of moving to an exciting place like San Francisco, we went with Sioux City, Iowa. You know, a little bit different.
Different kind of exciting.
Yeah, that's right. But no, go ahead and continue. I mean, I've worked for a while as a counselor at a residential treatment facility, and am a bit familiar with what that entails. But Maybe you could elaborate on that for listeners.
Well, it entails a lot of really hard stuff, it's about as hard a job as you're ever going to have. I mean, especially with the kids who had the acuity that we were serving at San Francisco at this time. Um, Residential care, whether we want to call it this or not, it's a descendant of the orphanage system, right? So the idea is generally we're gonna warehouse kids and we're going to work on behaviors so we can fix them and we'll send them home good as new whenever that's possible. But it's a long shot. You've got to, I think the way that I tend to describe residential care is if you do your job really, really, really well, you might break even. But more often than not, I think kids incur more harm there than anything. Having said that, there are situations in which there's no other option. Or the other option is incarceration or being sent out of state. So that was so I have a lot of experience in residential care, but I do see it as not just a band-aid, but a very dangerous and oftentimes destructive band-aid that gets overused. Once you run facilities like that and social workers are in a jam and they don't know where to put a kid, but they know there's a bed at, XYZ group home and they've got 90 kids on their caseload. Kids wind up there that don't need to and it becomes a pressure cooker.
Well, and I think it further puts pressure on both the provider, but also on just the system in general, right? Because then those beds that, like you said, are needed in some cases are filled with clientele, for lack of a better word, that don't necessarily require that level of care. There's just nowhere else for them to go. And so it kind of bogs
And
down
it's
the whole
incredibly
system.
expensive. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, hugely so.
All
Yeah,
that stuff.
it's
But
fun
I'll
times.
say this now. I'll say this. I said to a colleague at one point, I said, let's do a thought experiment here. Let's say that there was no such thing as residential care. Let's just say it didn't exist. And then I came to you one day and I said, hey, I've got a really good idea. I've got a really good idea. Let's take kids who are struggling and whose families are struggling. Let's pluck them out of their homes and out of their communities. And we're going to build underfunded facilities and we're going to put all of them together under one roof. And then we will put $12 an hour entry level staff in charge of the whole show and hope that we can send the kids home good as new. Are you buying? Do you buy this? So I think sometimes that bird's eye view is
Well, and a change in perspective can be valuable. I like the way that you phrase that, taking everyone, putting them there, and then underfunded positions to manage it and go have success. But go ahead and continue your story. So you're living in San Francisco. You're working in this position. Where does that lead?
Well, I was with the agency that I was with. It's an excellent organization, actually, and I was there for a number of years, not just at the residential. That was only the first year of my time there, and I did filled all sorts of roles. Community based, school based. I was a foster parent, a parent partner, worked with parents, and came back to at some point I returned to Iowa and which is my home state and started working within the field here. I was actually running a residential facility at the time and also for a very good organization, very good organization. And yet I had enough experience that I couldn't help but be acutely aware that what I was really in was the business of fixing kids. We were there to fix kids the way you might fix a broken vacuum cleaner or a faulty laptop or whatever. And I had been around enough to know that, that the healing journey of a child, the centerpiece of that cannot be coping skills or even cognitive behavioral therapy. Not that those things don't have their place, but if a child's been traumatized to the point that they are really, really suffering or very often a danger to themselves or a danger to others, what the child really needs is a healthy, flourishing, thriving family that in turn is part of a healthy, flourishing, thriving community. So and so has such and such behavior. She becomes aggressive when she gets overly anxious, and so we need to teach her to chew bubble gum rather than hitting people. It's not that has no place, but it does not belong at the center of a child's healing journey. And those are the things that we do center. And I think that we're all and this fix it model extends to families as well. I think oftentimes that's the genesis of foster care in the first place, right? And I say this as a foster adopt parent, but let's remove a child from a family that someone somewhere along the line has dubbed as broken. When push comes to shove, what we're really talking about is these are poor families, and put them in the home of a wealthier or quote unquote better and state vetted family for repair work and hope for the best. And I think that's misguided. And so my interest is in preventing all of that, preventing the point where a child needs residential care, preventing the need for foster care by strengthening families in a holistic way, which is a tall order. But I also want to be able to do this in a way that is scalable, which makes it a downright Herculean task. But I think it's a critical one, and so that's what we're pursuing.
And so when you say we, you're a part of an organization, you run an organization. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So I'll start with a term that you may or may not be familiar with, Chad, and that's family resource centers. And a family resource center is a grassroots community level hub whose whose services and whose resources, in other words, what's on offer at the family resource center is driven by local parents, local community leaders, and where everything mirrors and is a result of the strengths and the needs of a given community. We want parent leadership. I think families have had more than enough of service providers mandating to them, what they need. So parent leadership, and then one-stop shop. And when I say one-stop shop, I'll put it this way. One incredible and maybe a little bit unsettling fact that I'll give you is there are no fewer than 13,000 nonprofits in the Des Moines metro area. 13,000. Families are still not able to get the help that they need. That tells us that in Des Moines, and we see this in other communities too, we have less a problem of an absence of resources and more of a problem of access to resources. So we're leveraging these community-based hubs to form partnerships with service providers in the area. And through those partnerships, we can bring providers under one roof. And when we do that, families don't just get lists of referrals and referrals and referrals that they have to call and chase around and navigate. They get a one-stop shop where they can get warm handoffs to the providers that the community has identified are really critical to families. And so we're not only preventing foster care involvement, we're not only preventing child welfare involvement, we're also strengthening, if I can get a little nerdy here, social determinants of health. We're strengthening families.
No, it's great. I've had a lot of conversations with various politicians on both sides of the aisle on this issue, and a stance I'm really trying to take with this podcast, because by nature, I'm a very opinionated person, and as I've aged, I've learned how to put those opinions to the side and open my mind a little bit, right? And so my goal with this show is I want to seek answers, not just partisan talk. And so, in an effort to be very kind of just equal and fair, I've reached out to everyone. And in those conversations, I've heard a lot of the same elements. I've heard lots of talk on community. I've heard lots of talk on how the privatization of the mental health or of the health system in general has had unintended consequences, right? They were trying to address issues in what they viewed as a bloated system. Well, then now we're just having the same types of problems, just in a different type of system. And so on both sides, there's a lot of talk on, hey, what we've done isn't working, and we need it to be more community based. And so again, both sides of the aisle said, hey, when we reduce the number of regions in the state of Iowa, that wasn't a good thing. We need to go back to more regions or just community based, right? And so what I'm hearing from you really ties in a lot with what politicians on both sides of the aisle are saying. Hopefully we can get some action into that direction. But right? But at least there's the talk going on there. And so I would really love to hear about this model if you would share about it, because it sounds a lot like what I'm hearing.
Let's start with the both sides of the political aisle thing, because that is very central to what we're doing. I don't care, you might be as far to the left or as far to the right as possible, but nobody's going to have a problem with somebody who says, let's support a system in which families are helping one another in community for the better of each other and for the better of community. Regardless of what one's political viewpoint is, the fact of the matter is federal funding is not going to be dependable for the foreseeable future. That's just a reality. And so what better time to invest dollars at the local level so families can help one another in community? Now, yes, And there are networks, not just individual family resource centers, but there are networks of family resource centers in, I'm going to be off by one or two, but I want to say 42 states plus Washington, D.C. And some of the most robust family resource center networks are in some of the bluest states and they're in some of the reddest states. California, Kentucky, both have incredible and robust family resource center networks. And we can talk about what a network is here in a moment. So you said, and I kind of smirked a little bit when you said, well, everybody's saying that, so we'll see, like, does it actually happen? And when it comes to things like child welfare reform, these are really often very big case studies of practice lagging not just years, but sometimes decades behind the cutting edge philosophy. And it's very easy to point a finger at the state or at HHS and say, y'all are the bad guys. Why aren't you putting your money where your mouth is? And so let's unpack that question a little bit, because I do think that the state, and I think HHS gets demonized rather unfairly. I'm not saying that what's happening is appropriate or that it's enough, but I think we want to find a bad guy. And okay, so let's say that the state, let's say that HHS is all about this. Like, yes, let's get dollars to the community level so that families can identify what's needed in their communities so that they can help each other. It's not going to be a surveillance system because families don't want to be surveilled. They feel scared to get help if they know that might result in a case being opened. Let's do it. Let's go all in on the community level. Okay, great. So let's look at what's available out there. How many community level programs in the state of Iowa have our data tracking? How many of the grassroots mom and pop shops are actually tracking their data in the first place to say, this is what we're doing, this is how it's working, and this is how we know it's working? Not very many. How many of the local community hubs are up to speed on the latest and greatest in science-based interventions? How many of them know what the prevention, the clearinghouse is? How many of them have the fiscal infrastructure to tap into these state funding streams that we're all saying need to get to the community level? Not very many. And that's why we're not just strengthening family resource centers in Iowa, but we are drawing them into a statewide network, because the role of the network of family resource centers is to help them with those very things. As you say, Chad, everyone wants to see things being led by community. Everyone wants to see the dollars get to the community level. The local mom and pop family resource centers or community level programs in general aren't going to reach those marks on their own. They need the technical assistance, and they definitely need support in building out the fiscal. It's not easy to draw down state funding. And if you're operating out of a, yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just to say, I think just as somebody who's started and ended several small businesses, it's that paperwork aspect that is a drain, right? At least for me, it was. I would much rather have gone out. I would frame your new walls in your house. I do all that work, no problem. I love doing
Yeah.
it. But coming home and sitting down to do my books, oh my gosh, it was like pulling teeth, you know. And so I think that a lot of what you're referring to is like those mom and pop shops that they're doing the work. They love the work, but it's that data, that paperwork that just is like, gosh, do I have to do this?
And again, like it's, and if you're in the position of, if you're a higher up in HHS or in the state, you don't have enough funds to work with yourself, and that's not a negotiable, that's not a point of negotiation. You can't just, you have to. There are people above you who require that paperwork. It is a necessary evil, and I'm not saying we shouldn't try to reduce it. What I am saying is our vision, and what we're starting to get pretty good results on, frankly, it involves, let's take these mom and pop shops, elevate them through peer sharing, technical assistance, helping with their financial infrastructure so that we can start to make that magic actually happen.
No, I think that's a great approach of unifying various sources. It's crazy how, like what you said, with 13,000 different providers in one area, right? And if they were all on the same page and at least able to communicate effortlessly, but easier, or coordinate somehow, the impact would be magnified, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, we're seeing results. One of our family resource centers, one of the ones I'm really proud of, is called Moms Connect. It's a great program. It's in Dubuque, Iowa. A number of moms, most of whom, a strong majority of whom, had child welfare involvement in their backgrounds, have come together in community to help one another on a peer-to-peer basis in the ways that you and have been talking about, Chad. And since they've done that, zero of the moms who regularly participate in that program, zero of the moms have lost another child to the system. It's not happening. There's something palpably different when people come together in community and have a game plan. So it's encouraging. It's great. It's great to see, and we want to
Yeah, I
replicate it.
was no, exactly. I was talking with I believe it was Representative Henderson, and a lot of our conversation focused on community, and he talked about how, when he was a kid, it wasn't uncommon for you to live, a couple of houses down from your uncle or your aunt or your grandparents, right? And so you had that kind of community built in. Sure, you everyone had that weird uncle, and you just kind of learned to live with them, but you just supported each other. Oh, mom needs to run to the store, run over to your aunt's house, right? Or dad needs to go to work, or go help a neighbor with this, you go here, right? And there's just kind of this built-in system into that local community, and we become a much more worldview based society, right? Jobs aren't just located where you grew up, right? You can travel anywhere you want. Norway, right? For me, it was China. You can go anywhere in the world and work. And so that physical community is different than it was years ago. And so how do you foresee us as a society or your organization working with local communities to kind of build that sense back up to something that's comparable, right? If that makes sense. I'm just trying to see how we can reclaim, maybe is a good word, some of that community that we've lacked. Because I know for me, I don't know my neighbors 3 houses down. I've never really interacted with them. And so it seems different in modern days. Not saying that it necessarily has to be, but how do you foresee kind of tackling that problem, or how have you? And it seems like you've had some success in that area. So how have you been doing that?
Boy, you're really asking the right question there, and it's frankly, I think it's a little bit of a question that's under examined because again, a theme that keeps coming up in our conversation is everybody's on board with this idea of like let's shift the focus to the community, but how do you codify that? Like how do you make that happen? How do you scale that? How do you make it so that people know their neighbors two doors down and so on? And I'll say this, network of family resource centers, we're not going to be able to change the culture of the United States writ large so that everybody knows their neighbors and it's Mayberry or whatever. We can't do that. But I think that how do you start? How do you start to really build community? The example I often use is this. If you've got a local operation, a small operation, or maybe a big operation, whatever it is, if a struggling parent comes by and needs support and you hand that parent a week's worth of diapers and a week's worth of food, that's swell. That's really nice. But if you just show them the door after that, which is what generally happens, you're going to see them again and again and again and again. And you've missed a tremendous opportunity. The opportunity is you've got the chance in interactions like that to start building community. In an interaction like that, I'm not just going to hand the parent the stuff and say, have a great one. We'll see you same time, next month. I'm going to say, you know what? I'm a service provider. And that tells me I've got some real blind spots. I bet there's a lot out there that I don't see, that I don't know. I wonder if you could take just a few minutes and tell me, like, what needs are out there that I don't even know about? Where am I missing the mark? I really need you to teach me. Gosh, I'd really love to pick your brain again. And not just that, I wonder if you know any other folks who might have some needs that we haven't been able to tackle. Now, those are just the first baby steps, but those are the baby steps towards something really powerful and really important. And that something important is in that interaction, the parent and I have begun to flatten the hierarchy a little bit. I've flipped the script. We've flipped the script where it's like, how can you help me lead? How can you help me build this? Because it's the above the service, it's subtle. No one says it out loud, but this subtle thing where the service provider or the social worker or the therapist sits up here and the family is down here. That's what gets in the way of that community. So we've got to see the parents and community leaders as partners from the very, very beginning, and not in a tokenistic way. Like, allow them to teach you because they will.
Right. And I think it kind of relates to teaching in a sense, right? Like every year you have to start fresh with this class. And, my fourth graders, until I make that connection with them and they know, Mr. Benson, he cares about me. The education academic aspect kind of is not as successful, right? they're still learning, but they're not as invested. But once you hook them and they know that you're there for the long haul, you care, you want to help them, then there's a little bit more buy-in, right? And it seems like that's kind of a similar sense that I'm getting from you is once that community sees you as, hey, you're an invested partner with them, you care about them. You're not just some guy up in a tower, doling out gifts, right? He lives in my community. She works in my community. She's here. She wants my advice. And so that's where you get that community built up. Yeah, I think so. The type of clientele that you're serving, I know earlier you kind of alluded to it. You said that a lot of the time it's the poorer income households that are impacted most. Can you describe a little bit more about what are the outcomes typically when you're looking at kids in foster care that are taken from their homes and situations like that, plugged in somewhere else? Why is that a bad thing? What are some of those struggles that they face and the realities that they'll grow into if we don't start kind of looking at more community-based solutions?
Well, for starters, once a child enters foster care, prison is statistically more likely than college. That's pretty startling right there. Different studies come up with different percentages here, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 75% of adults who are human trafficked had previously spent time in the foster care system. In Iowa, we've had at least a couple in recent memory high profile deaths of kids who were in or had been adopted out of foster care. We've had institutions closed for excessively restraining and isolating children. The health outcomes of people who are removed from their families are um, poorer, you know, financially, physically, mental health are all poorer decades out after the fact. This is science. And it all comes down to, once, if we maintain this model of let's remove a broken kid from a broken family and put them with a wealthier family for repair work, it completely overlooks the human need for connection. And I believe that not just science backs that human connection and having the chance to belong and even to contribute will beat coping skills and therapeutic interventions every time. And that's not to say that those other things aren't useful. Therapy can be great. Coping skills can be helpful. But again, that's not the center of a child or an adult's healing journey.
It's not a holistic treatment. It's a symptom management in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So instead of removing kids from these families, we want to develop this wraparound kind of system, community-based system of supports. What are some of the misconceptions that you believe either the public or policymakers have about families in this situation, right? About those families that are having their kids removed and placed elsewhere that you think this community-based system is better equipped to handle?
That they're bad people, that they should just try harder. I'd say that's pretty much it. I'd say that's a misconception about the families. The science again is pretty darn clear that when parents have the human connection and the material support to raise their kids, things go a lot better. And I think that's backed up by the fact that a considerable majority of removals, not just in Iowa but everywhere, are neglect. They're not physical abuse, they're not sexual abuse, they're neglect. And frontline social workers have a really, really hard time distinguishing between neglect and poverty. But when push comes to shove, it's not rich people whose kids are getting taken away. So I think, yeah, the misconception is just that they're bad people who don't try hard enough.
And so a lot of, I mean, at least in my experience in conversations and everything, is those that become involved in that system where they're having their kids removed for whatever reason because we don't have these community-based supports. They're angry, right? They're hurt, they're traumatized, they're let down, any number of valid emotions. And your system seems like it would be better at building the trust. How do you bridge those that have already had that experience and have that mistrust or that sense of frustration, anger? How do you bridge that or repair that so that the community model can be successful, right? It sounds like because you hinted at earlier that you have a group of women that haven't had another child removed since they've become involved in a community. So how did you bridge that to build that trust?
The only way is to prove it to them. You keep showing up as a partner. as an equal, and you do it over and over and over again, because you can say whatever you like. Even that hypothetical interaction that I spelled out earlier, where it's like, you have something to teach me. Let me pick your brain. I hope I get to talk to you again. That's great, but I can only assume there's a tremendous amount of skepticism on the other side of that conversation. And when Moms Connect was building what they're building in Dubuque, they didn't have that trust right out of the gates. They had to put their money where their mouth is. And actually, can I touch on a parallel point that you were just talking
Please
about,
do.
Chad? A couple things I want to highlight too is, I don't want to speak in absolutes. There
Hmm.
are times that children need to be removed. If a child is being habitually physically or sexually abused, even if that's their blood relative, removal needs to happen sometimes. It's very easy for us to get idealistic and say removal is always bad. I wouldn't say that. I would say removal is much more often avoidable and much more harmful for the children when we do remove but I don't want to speak in absolutes. And I also want to say too, like, you used the phrase your system when you were referring to what we're building in Iowa, but I wouldn't call it my system for two reasons. One, I didn't invent it. I just got it off the ground in this state. But also I would say we don't have any illusions that we are going to replace all of HHS or all of the child welfare system. In fact, these are some of the folks that we want to partner with. So it's not a substitute. And in fact, I would say I know that the willingness for things to be more community led is there within HHS. We just want to help to that goal, and we want to do that for the interest of families and the interest of kids.
So it's more you want to facilitate a common goal as opposed to setting up a brand new system yourself.
Well, it's a brand new system, but it's not like we're going to overthrow the state government or overthrow health and human services. So yeah,
You're
it's
not
a
you're
it is
not
a
training a
it is a new
militia.
system. No, there will be no coup. There will be no coup. Just a lot of kids who get to stay home with their parents.
I think it's a very valid point. I think a lot of times in our state, removal is one of the first options, right? And it should definitely be one of the last options. I was talking with a assistant district attorney the other day, and he made the comment: you never want the government involved with your kids. It's an impersonal entity, right? And so it's just you kind of want to minimize that as much as possible. Well, removal is them diving head first into the relationship with your child, and so I very much appreciate you bringing that point up because it should be a last resort.
Yeah,
Nobody
let me
says it's not
highlight what you
needed,
just
but last resort. Go ahead.
let me highlight what you just said too, because it's yeah. I mean, we want kids to stay home with families, and we want the state as uninvolved in families' homes as possible. That sounds pretty darn bipartisan friendly to me.
I think so. Yeah. And so, no, I guess that kind of ties into where I wouldn't mind going. You talked about scaling and how you scale this. And I think that's an interesting dilemma, right? Because every community is unique. And so how are you approaching scaling and also funding? Because funding goes hand in hand with scaling. How are you navigating that? How are you approaching that in order to ensure a long-term impact rather than well, I'm in, I tried my best and I just kind of fade away? What's your approach?
Well, it's hard. It's really hard. And you didn't say it in quite these words, but I mean, when you're talking about something grassroots and then trying to scale it, it's really hard for those two things to not come into conflict with one another. If you try to scale too hard too fast, then you've got just kind of another dead formula that is no longer grassroots. If you're too soft pedaling the scaling, you might have one wonderful program where you've got a lot of parental trust and great results, but you're helping one community. And so the answer to your question is this: there are already a lot of grassroots local family led programs out there in the state of Iowa, lots of them. They have the struggles that you and I talked about earlier. Maybe they're not data tracking. Maybe they don't know science-based practices. Their fiscal infrastructure is probably not what it would need to be. And so when we invest time, energy, and money in the network, then we get a cascade effect where we're helping lots and lots of programs. I'm not saying it happens overnight. The network has only been around for a couple of years itself. It takes a long time to reach all of those programs and to gain trust from them too. We can't come along as an outside source and wag a finger and say, well, let me tell you how we're going to do things. If programs are interested in upping their game, we need to approach those programs the way we would approach a family that needs some support. The trust isn't there yet either. We've got to build a relationship, and it's got to be a partnership. So the scaling takes time if we want dollars to go as far as we possibly can get them to go in order to strengthen families in a grassroots setting. That's why investing in the network of family resource centers is the way to go.
Right. So we've talked a bit about the network, but is there anything else that you feel would be beneficial for me or the listeners to understand about this idea of a network that we haven't necessarily touched on?
Maybe just, a little bit of I'll flesh out just a little bit of what it means. Like, okay, that sounds great, Ryan. You're going to come around and make all of these grassroots programs stronger through your network. But what does that actually look like? And there is a science-based framework. There are standards of quality. It's the best training and quite possibly the best model that I've ever run into that have been honed through the years and tailored precisely for the purpose of strengthening local programs. So there's a framework there. It's a malleable framework, but there's a framework. And the only other so what I would say, and so I sometimes, Chad, I don't. I'm glad we're on a long form podcast because when I have to give like a pitch, I can't get into all this or I lose people very, very quickly. But there is a network of Iowa Family Resource Centers. I mentioned that there are 41 or 42 other states plus DC that also have networks of family resource centers. All of us, in turn, form a national network of family resource centers. And so these local programs, these local Iowa programs that we're strengthening or founding, they're not just connected to other programs in Iowa. We're able to connect them to programs throughout the United States. I mentioned that states like California, Colorado, Kentucky are much further along in this process than Iowa. And so we've got them leading us and guiding us too as well. And that's where there is this broader framework. It's not just me and the other people who lead the Iowa network groping around in the dark trying to find a way to keep kids and families at home. There's a path. There's a way to do this.
Seems to me like I've heard a lot of people refer to the current system as a patchwork, right? And that's inevitable based on how our government functions, right? We identify a problem. Okay, let's legislate this solution, right? And as time goes, you end up getting just this patchwork of solutions everywhere. And this seems like a way that you're trying to take these pieces and maybe not bring them together, but guide people to the pieces they specifically need quicker. So a way to kind of maybe address the patchworkiness of the current system. So with that in mind, what's one thing that you think policymakers should take note of or work to address in the immediate to help facilitate this community-based approach quicker?
I have an answer. I don't know if it's the answer you're looking for. If you don't like it, I can give you a new one.
No, I just want honesty. That's one thing I made sure when I did this, I've interviewed people that I disagree with completely. I've interviewed people I agree with. I'm really making a concerted effort to try to just gather information and let people kind of parse through it. And, that's one thing I want to make sure I do is I respect everyone's opinions, whether I agree or not. Right. But you never know unless you put yourself out there and think about it.
So what we're talking about is a real paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
It's a paradigm shift that people at the state and HHS level will cheerlead, frankly, and I don't mean that disparagingly, but people will go rah, 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 rah. When it comes time to actually pony up and start making a paradigm shift, that's when policymakers go, why don't we just fund what we funded last year? I don't want my name on something new. I mean, it sounds good. Or in some way, shape, So what I want people to understand is this. We know this is a paradigm shift that has to happen. It has to happen for Iowa's kids. It has to happen for Iowa's families. If we're not willing to incur any risk whatsoever, then we are putting 100% of that risk on those kids and families. We know we made it. We know we need to move in this direction. We know Iowa's kids and families need this. You got to have the courage to jump off the high dive, or it's never going to happen. And if you don't, then you're shoving the kids and families off the high dive, and they might not be able to swim just yet.
Yeah, I think maybe this isn't the best illustration to use, but that whole definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And I think that kind of can become the motto of politicians is right because it's comfortable. They know it. They can feel like we've already addressed this, so we're good to go. And I like that idea of risk.
if you keep doing what you've always done and it doesn't work out so well, no one's gonna highlight your name because this is the way it is. If you
Yeah,
shift something and something doesn't go the way that it's supposed to, all of a sudden your name's on there. But again, if you're a policymaker whose MO is taking on zero risk, then you are putting 100% risk on kids and families.
right. It's like that Teddy. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt that talked about the man in the arena, right? It's the man in the arena who counts, not the one who's. Yeah, you got that. Please tell me. I love that quote. I think this was meant to be. Yeah, but I think that same sentiment applies here, right? You're right. A politician who just kind of goes with the flow, isn't willing to accept that risk. Yeah, they're not going to be publicly humiliated, drug through the mud, right? If something doesn't work the first chance, first try. Whereas, you're right. 100% of the risk is on the families now, and a lot of those families are families who have already actively said, "Hey, I need help," right? And so, yeah, it would be a very good point that if we're really truly serious about changing the way things are and trying a new approach and moving in a direction that is, from what I'm hearing and what I've heard other people speak on, apt to be more successful, then we need to take that risk. We can't
So
all
when
just
you
sit
ask me,
back and accept it status quo.
yep. So if you want to ask me what's one thing I wish policymakers would understand, it's do the right thing. Do the right thing, even though it's new and new is scary.
Yeah. 100%. No, I like that. I like the way you phrase that. I still think that's funny about that quote. My mind is still
Yeah.
there. So, what? One thing I try to ask everyone is what gives you hope? What gives you hope, whether it's in your work, the families you serve? What gives you hope to continue going forward?
I get hope. I am given hope when I see what families and parents are capable of when they're given a chance. So those folks, those parents inspire me. I am given hope by the fact that, for all the problems that the current system has, we absolutely have seen a reduction in out of home placements in the state of Iowa. That's unequivocal. It gives me hope to know that everybody is starting to at least speak the same language. We're not happy, very few people are happy with where the system is at right now in terms of prevention and family centeredness. Very few people are happy with that. But the conversation is markedly different than it was 10 years ago. The conversation is far different. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there were far fewer people even recognizing that there was a problem. So I think that the ship is turning around. We just want to get it done faster and better.
And to be fair to everyone, a country is it's a very large ship, and it turns very slowly. And I want to just real quick. I know you mentioned this earlier about everyone wants a bad guy, right? Everyone wants to blame somebody, and I think that's a very easy thing to fall into. I know I've done it. It's still times that I do, and then I have to shake myself out of that mentality, right? A lot of people are working within the constraints that they have to, or with the policy that they're operating under. And so I think a little bit of grace can go a long way in having these conversations, right? In bringing people to the table. And I think the more we can do that, the more change can be effectualized, right? So,
Yeah,
but thank
I,
you.
I
Yeah.
think I think we have to I think when we're considering policymakers or state level people, we have to remember that they're in a jam just like I'm in a jam of some sort, and the families are in some sort of a jam, and it's a really hard situation. And but that's not to let people off the hook. There needs to be accountability too. I know a lot of state level people are in a very difficult situation, and it's not as easy as just snapping your fingers. It's not fair to just assume like, oh, well, we want to rip kids out of the homes of lower socioeconomic families. That's not the case. And yet, my challenge, I will still boldly and unapologetically reiterate what I said earlier: do the right thing. If you're in a position of power, do the right thing, even though it's new and new is scary. You're not a villain, but you have a great deal of power and responsibility.
We can go the Spider-Man quote on this one now.
Which one's the Spider-Man quote?
With great power comes great responsibility.
Was that Spider-Man? For some reason, I
Wasn't
always
it?
thought that was
Maybe it's
probably.
Superman. I don't know. Maybe I'm mixed up with all my superheroes.
My gosh, I thought it was Lord of the Rings. You're probably right. You're
I
probably
don't
right.
know. Now after this, I'm going to have to Google it and find out. But you don't have that
Yeah.
one on your wall, right?
No, no.
So,
I'm not powerful enough, so
yeah, that's
I
right.
I
They
just
don't give me
and
that
yet I
poster.
still have lots of responsibility. So
I don't see how this is working out. No, thank you for joining us. Where can people go to learn more about your work and your I don't want to say, gosh, what is it? I had it
Let me
written down
put it, can I
earlier.
put it in the, I guess it's a podcast. They need to hear it. Let me give you a
Yeah.
couple of websites here.
Well, and I can put
National
those up too.
National Family Support Network.org. I'll put those in the chat. That's the
Okay.
national network of family resource centers.
Hmm.
And Moms Connect Dubuque would be a good search for one of our models. The Iowa network itself should have a website shortly. But for right now, what I can give you is one of our centers and the national network, which Iowa belongs to.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to keep in contact. And then, as things are developing, if there's any way that I can help spread the story, I'm just kind of beginning this myself, and the audience is still growing. But I think the more people bring these to light, these thoughts, these models, these conversations, bring it to light, the more we can usher in that change that is so needed. And so I'd love to be a part of that and to help spread whatever news I can.
I'd like that too, Chad. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Chad, for what you're doing.
What a powerful and frankly hopeful conversation with Ryan Adams. In our last episode, Senator Zimmer laid out the state's pay now or pay later dilemma. Do we invest in preventative care now, or do we pay exponentially more for the consequences of failure in our justice systems, our emergency rooms, our communities, all of those down the road? The Family Resource Center model that Ryan is building is the pay now solution in real time. This proactive approach stands in stark contrast to the reactive, crisis-driven system we currently have. Now, the Garcia settlement gave us a roadmap to better children's mental health services, but under Garcia's leadership, it often feels like the state has confused the map for the journey, then promptly lost the map in the seat cushions. And if that map is anything like the one DHHS caseworkers are given to navigate their own system, we are all completely screwed. But what Ryan's work shows us is that we don't have to be stuck in that cynical reality. Investing in community and trusting parents is not only more compassionate, it's the smartest fiscal decision our state could make. By strengthening families on the front end, we can avoid the catastrophic costs of a system that fails too many. In fact, studies show that nearly 80% of incarcerated individuals report at least one traumatic childhood experience. Unaddressed trauma is a direct pipeline to our justice system. This approach offers a way to cut through the political gridlock by addressing the valid concerns from both sides of the aisle. For fiscal conservatives, smaller, earlier investments in community support prevent the massive 9-figure costs of failure later. For social progressives, it's a model built on empowering parents and local leaders to solve problems themselves, respecting local autonomy and building self-sufficiency. This isn't just an idea. It's a model that offers a real path forward. And it brings us back to the core of this podcast, which is, where do we as citizens fit into this picture? We've spent a lot of time on this podcast dissecting the problems within Iowa's child and welfare system. We've heard the frustration, the heartbreak, and the stark realities of budgetary decisions. But today, with Mr. Adams, we're shifting focus to a proactive, proven solution, the Family Resource Center model. So what exactly is a Family Resource Center? Think of it as a central hub, a welcoming, community-based living room for families where support is offered before crisis hits, not just after. The fundamental idea is to move away from that reactive fix-it approach and towards a proactive strategy that strengthens families right where they live. And the FRC model operates on several core principles. One, it is community-led. These aren't top-down, state-mandated programs. Each FRC is unique, designed by and for its specific community to meet its particular needs and reflect its culture. As experts often say, when you visit one family resource center, you've visited one family resource center. The second principle, it's strengths-based. So instead of seeing families as a collection of problems, FRCs identify and build on their existing strengths. They empower parents, recognizing them as experts in their own children's lives. The third principle is that it's prevention-focused, and this is crucial. The primary goal is to prevent child maltreatment, neglect, and family crises from ever occurring. They build protective factors, things like parental resilience, social connections, and concrete support in times of need. These help families weather life's storms. Research consistently shows that families engaged with FRCs are significantly less likely to enter the formal child welfare system. And the fourth principle is that it's a one-stop shop. FRCs connect families to a wide array of services and resources under one roof, or through robust community partnerships. Now, this could include parenting classes, support groups, mental health services, connections to food and housing assistance, job training, or simply just a safe, welcoming space for kids and parents to connect. Here in Iowa, you don't have to look far to see this model in action. The Family Resource Center in Carroll, Iowa, for instance, is a fantastic example. What started as a child abuse prevention council now effectively serves 19 Iowa counties, offering everything from parenting support to crisis intervention. They're a testament to how local preventative efforts can make a huge impact statewide, and they're a key partner with Prevent Child Abuse Iowa, PCA Iowa, and which champions these kinds of evidence-based prevention programs across the state. These are the programs that truly embody the pay now or pay later philosophy. Investing a little now will save a lot down the road. So when Ryan talks about building a network of these centers, he's talking about a proven, compassionate, and fiscally responsible way to build stronger families and stronger communities across Iowa. Now, it's important to take a clear-eyed look at what a solution like Family Resource Centers can and can't do. The prevention model that Ryan Adams is building is, without a doubt, the future. It is the visionary, long-term transformation that we desperately need to stop the cycle of trauma and crisis. But, and this is a critical but, it is not an instant fix for the emergency we are in right now. Building this network will take time, resources, and a monumental shift in our state's approach. And while we build it, thousands of Iowa children are currently in the system, in crisis, and falling through the cracks of the very ghost network we've been talking about. These kids cannot wait for a long-term solution. Their needs are immediate. And this is why we have to pursue a two-track solution. Track one is transformation. We must fully commit to building and funding this preventative network of family resource centers. This is how we change the future and ensure that a decade from now, far fewer families ever reach a breaking point. But track two is the triage. Concurrently, we must demand immediate, robust, and effective support for the children who are in crisis today. This means fighting for higher Medicaid reimbursement rates to attract more providers, demanding better oversight of residential treatment facilities, and ensuring that our schools have the counselors and resources they need to function as a real safety net, just as Representative Henderson discussed. We cannot sacrifice the urgent needs of today's children for the important vision of tomorrow. We have to do both. One track prevents future fires, while the other puts out the fires that are burning right now. Pursuing both at the same time is the only way to build a system that is truly worthy of our children. So where do we go from here? The conversations we've had on this podcast reveal a system that it's failing. It's failing Iowa families, but they also reveal a path forward. It's a path built on prevention, on community, and on the simple, powerful idea that strengthening families is the most effective social program there is. But this change won't happen on its own. It requires us to move from passive listeners to active participants. And here's how you can help build that future. First, we need to reframe the conversation. When you talk about these issues with friends, family, or even elected officials, let's challenge that old fix-it narrative. Let's stop talking about broken families and start talking about building resilient communities. The next time you hear someone talking about the high cost of social services, ask them, what is the even higher cost of doing nothing? Second thing we can do is demand a smarter investment. The pay now or pay later dilemma is very, very real. You can demand that our state make the smarter choice. Find your legislators at legis.iowa.gov and tell them you support shifting funds towards preventative, community-based programs like Family Resource Centers. Specifically ask them, when are they going to address Iowa's low Medicaid reimbursement rates, which is a key barrier to getting providers into our state? And third, your story is crucial. The most powerful tool we have to fight bureaucratic indifference is personal experience. I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to politicians, legislators, people who work at HHS, anybody, community members, and when I tell them my story, and I tell them the amount of effort and time it took to try and find treatment for my son, it blows their mind. And they say, I didn't know it took that long. When I tell them the bureaucratic hoops that I was drugged through, they get angry. All I hear is, that's wrong. That shouldn't happen. And I say, yeah, you're right. It shouldn't, but it does. And it happens to a lot more than just me. I'm just one that's willing to speak out. So if you felt the frustration of the system, your story is a vital piece of evidence we need to demand change. Share it with me at chad@letstalkiowa.com. Reach out. I can keep it anonymous if you want. You don't even have to appear on the podcast yourself. If you just want to tell me the story, I can relay it. But your story matters. Your voice, combined with others, creates a chorus that they will not be able to ignore. Thank you. Thank you for being part of this crucial conversation. And stay tuned, because we have a whole lot more to uncover. I want to ask you to do one thing today. Share this episode. Share it with a friend, with a legislator, with someone who still believes this isn't happening in Iowa. And if you're a parent, a provider, or someone living through this system, reach out. You are not alone. You can email me at chad@letstalkiowa.com or find more information at our website, letstalkiowa.com. Because this isn't just a podcast. It's the beginning of a conversation we've needed for too long. Stop staying silent. Let's talk Iowa. Let's keep going. Every share helps raise awareness, and every conversation starts with a story. Follow us on Facebook at Let's Talk Iowa and on Instagram at Let's Talk Iowa Podcast for episode updates, behind-the-scenes content, and ways to take action. Because truth changes policy, and Iowa families deserve better. Truth matters. Families matter. You matter. Let's Talk Iowa. We'll see you next time. It's the beginning of a conversation we've needed for too long. Stop staying silent. Let's talk Iowa. Let's keep going.